and damp, but it kept them together, and Jimmy knew that if they lost it, they'd be taken to the workhouse and split up. He and Ollie could survive it, but Alfie wouldn't last a week. He took a few deep breaths, then forced himself to open his eyes and keep climbing. A few minutes later, he reached the 4th floor. "Now comes the hard part," he whispered. A shallow flange, where one length of pipe fitted into another, sat parallel with the window ledge. Jimmy climbed up past the flange, then placed his toes on its lip, his left hand still wedged behind the pipe. When he'd steadied himself, he slowly stretched his right leg toward the window. His foot found the stone ledge. His reaching right hand closed on a mullion. Quick as a cat, he released the downpipe and pivoted his weight sideways. And then he was standing fully on the ledge, with only a few thin, rusted pieces of metal to keep him there. His heart crashed against his ribs like a trapped animal. "Keep your head! Keep your bloody head!" he whispered. Jimmy forced his gaze to the right. There was an iron safety bracket bolted to the wall next to the loophole. "Same as before," he thought. "Just get a foot onto the loophole's deck, reach for the bracket, transfer your weight." But the gap between the window ledge and the deck was wider than the one between the pipe and the ledge. It had to be a good yard, and never had a yard seemed more like a mile. "Don't think, just do it," he told himself. He quickly stepped across the gap. His foot landed on the deck. His hand grasped the bracket. And that's when he heard them. Footsteps, heavy and rhythmic, echoing down the narrow street. Jimmy froze. His hand tightened on the bracket. Slowly he turned his head and looked down. A man emerged from the darkness. He was carrying a bullseye lantern. Its rays washed the cobblestones ahead of him in silver light. He stopped in front of a warehouse and tried its door. Then he raised the lantern and peered into one of its windows. Light bounced back at him off the glass. Jimmy saw it glint off the row of gold buttons running down the man's jacket, and his guts turned to water. The police constable lowered his lantern and continued down the street, testing a lock, rattling a chain. Jimmy remained motionless, one leg stretched across the gap, the other still on the shallow window ledge. He didn't dare shift his weight to the deck. It was old and made of wood. It would creak. Closer and closer the constable came, until he was directly below Jimmy, rattling the padlock on the factory's door. All he had to do was shine his lantern up the wall, and Jimmy was done for. But instead, the bobby put his lantern on the ground and pulled a small brass case from his jacket pocket. He clicked it open, drew a cigarette from it, then squatted down by the lantern to light it. Jimmy's fear grew. How long was the man going to stay here? He could see the glowing tip of his cigarette now. He could smell the smoke. "Go, Rosa," Jimmy silently urged him. "Move on." But the bobby took his time, relishing each deep draw. The cramp began slowly, just a soft, dark ripple through Jimmy's left leg, like a snake slithering through water. Then it wound itself tightly around the muscles of his calf and squeezed, harder and harder, until the breath left his lungs and sweat beaded on his skin, and he bit his lip so hard his teeth drew blood. His body shook with pain, but he did not utter a sound. And finally, almost 10 minutes later, the constable stood, threw the still glowing stub of his cigarette onto the cobbles.